What's up, guys? It's Cole here. Haven't been live in a minute. Actually, haven't been live in my office in a minute. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but got a little couch decked out with some pillows, whiteboard, a plant. I hired my roommate to decorate stuff just because that is just not how my mind works. But anyway, hopefully you guys enjoy that. What we're going to talk about is was training in a sales rep today, and it brought up a really good point of a key critical mistake that I see sales reps and entrepreneurs, anybody on sales calls, make all of the time in the discovery or information gathering phase of the call. So what we're going to talk about is just what that mistake is, why it's critical, and the two ways we can handle that scenario, and then what we actually need to be able to do to handle it the right way and do so consistently. And what's up, Charles? What's up, Joey? And the reason why this is important, guys, is for one, if you're making this mistake, it's a sale killer. It kills trust. It also kills your ability to go deep. A lot of times we'll go wide on the call. We'll cover a lot of things, but we'll never go deep into the pain if we make this mistake. And at the same time, being able to handle this properly is one of the fastest ways to shorten your call times, in my experience, as well as have deep, thoughtful conversations where we get to the urgency and the why now, as well as make your conversations different and organic, to where you don't feel like you're having the same conversation again and again and again and again, which is one of the worst parts about taking a lot of strategy calls, right? We can actually find a way to make the calls unique, and every single call its own different universe, opposed to it just being a repeatable process every single time. So what's the mistake? So the mistake is being more committed to your script and your sales process than what the prospect is actually saying and telling you. Okay? Now this might seem obvious. It's obviously if you don't listen to the prospect, they're not going to connect with you, they're not going to trust you, they're not going to buy. But you would be surprised, even with, and I'll give you an example. I was training a very good closer today. And I'm not trying to come down on him all. He's a beast. He's one of the best closers I've trained. And throughout the call, the prospect was bringing up again and again about how he was how he had just recommitted over the past weekend to this vision that he had, and how all of a sudden now this is at the top of this priority list, and that time is a premium to him. Okay, and because the salesperson was following a rigid structure, right, and they wanted to ask certain questions in a certain syntax and not deviate from the script and the process, he didn't dig into those things right when they were presented to him. And instead, he wanted to circle back to those things when it aligned within his process. So what ended up happening is, he kind of let those things just fall by the wayside. And then 10 to 15 minutes later, out of the blue, he just asked, with no context whatsoever, why he was asking the question. It was like, okay, next question. What's it costing you to stay where you're at? Right? And what do you think the guy's response was? He was like, I don't know. That's a really good question. I guess I'd have to think about it. I guess it's not really costing me anything. This would just be nice to have, is kind of the response that he gave. So the key critical mistake that I was trying to teach him is dude, why were you asking that question? You're asking that question. What's up, Kevin? What's up, Phil? We got Sam on here. I was like, well, dude, what's up, Robert? We got, why were you asking that question? Well, we're asking that question because what is it costing you to do nothing? We want to get the urgency, right? We want to get why now, what's going to happen if nothing changes. But you got no compliance with that response because you asked it out of the blue with no context whatsoever. When on the contrary, what would have happened if we were able to utilize what he was saying earlier on the call 3 times and ask a skilled question based upon that one demonstrates that we're listening by the thanks for the compliment, Marty. I just got my haircut yesterday, Marty noticed. Only person on the live to notice I got a haircut, so the rest of you guys need to step up your game. No, I'm just kidding. But on the contrary of being, committed to your script and just asking what's it costing you to stay where you're at now, being able to ask a question that's relevant to what he just said about recommitting to his vision, that 1, demonstrates that you were listening by the very nature of asking the question, and 2, allows you to go deeper, is the fastest way to elicit that urgency. So for instance, what I would have said instead is, he's like, yeah, over the past weekend, I've really recommitted to, getting this thing done. Right? I'm not going to say what thing it is because I don't want to, give a tell of what the company is. But I've really recommitted over this past weekend to getting this damn thing done. It's like, wow. Okay, so, and I commend you for that. And I'm curious, how long has this been something you kind of been thinking about up in your head a little bit, but that just hasn't been properly executed? Like, how long have you been wanting to do this? Oh, I've been wanting to do it for like 3 years. Gotcha, 3 years. Okay, oh, and can I ask you a personal question? Now, you've been doing this for like 3 years now and kind of thinking about it, but never really putting it into play and executing it. And you mentioned like just over the past weekend that this is something that you decided is something you're really going to recommit to. I'm just curious, but why all of a sudden did you decide to make that change right now? What was the thing that happened that made you really kind of click and say, hey, the last 3 years aren't going to be like the next 3 years? Okay, so contrast that, guys, and contrast that to the other way it was handled when we were committed to our script, right? We said, what's it costing you to just stay where you're at, right? With no context whatsoever, versus, asking a question to go deeper on what he said. How long has it been going on? Then asking permission. Hey, can I ask you a personal question? And then referencing what he said. You said that, last weekend, you've really recommitted to this. I'm just curious because, the past 3 years, it's just kind of been something that you've been rattling around in your brain. Now you're really to put it into action. What changed? Like, why now though? Okay. And what's really important with those types of questions, guys, by the way, this is an aside, is like these pregnant, I don't know if they're pregnant pauses is the right term, but they're almost like, you're kind of stuttering through the question, but it's like thinking about what you're saying as you're saying it to where it's coming out very thoughtful, opposed to, okay, well, why is this important right now though? Right? That's like very like just coming from a script, opposed to like we're really thinking about what they're saying and asking a question to go deeper. So the moral of the story is, because I want you guys to get the lesson here. The biggest mistake I see, and it's so simple, and it's just like one thing I wish I could fix for everybody, is being more committed to your sales process and your script, okay, and the order and the syntax of which the questions are asked, opposed to actually listening to what the prospect is saying and utilizing that information to ask a question that, one, goes deeper, and two, demonstrates your listening by the very nature of even asking the question. Okay, because this eliminates another problem I see a lot, which is like sales reps will want to, the prospect will tell them something, and reps will want to just summarize and recap what the prospect has said every time the prospect says something. It's like short little mini recap after mini recap after mini recap. And that kills your ability to go deep on the call. Okay, it just keeps it surface level, and it just is you're like talking all of the time. So on the contrary, when you're able to ask, and this is what Socratic dialogue is all about, is using what the person is saying to ask a question that goes deeper based on what they just told you, and by the very nature of asking the question and how specific the question was, it demonstrates that you were listening. So I just gave an example of that with, gotcha, and you mentioned, you just recommitted to this over the past weekend. Like, how long has this been something that you've kind of been thinking about but really never putting into action? Oh, it's, right there. I use what he said to ask a question that goes deeper. Oh, 3 years, right? Wow, 3 years. Can I ask you a personal question about that? You mentioned you're recommitted this past weekend, but you've been thinking about it for the past 3 years, and then we transition that into why now. So we're always using what they're telling us as justification to ask the next question. Okay, Christina says, LOL, that was me. Yep, that was you. LOL, that was me before you pointed that out. It makes a huge difference. Yeah, so like another big mistake, and I'm kind of getting off on a tangent now, which I put AMA in the description. So like, drop your questions here, and I'll go as long as you guys want. But what Christina's talking about is how I said the recap stuff, right? Sales reps just, I don't know if it's like we're kind of seeking rapport a little bit. We're trying to build artificial trust. And so we just recap, like the prospect will say something and then we just recap it every single time. Okay, so you're saying is this, blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, and then they ask the next question. one of the best habits to get into is either um, just saying gotcha and ask the next question, or saying gotcha and ask the next question, but ask a really skilled question that by the very nature of asking it demonstrates that you did hear them. Does that make sense? Because when the question's based on what they said, obviously you're going deeper in the conversation, and it's not one coming off of a script. It's one that is only relevant because of how the conversation has gone so far. And that's the difference between a a prospect who feels like the sales rep is actually listening to them and really hearing them, versus one that, you know, it's like the prospect can tell that this person's going through a script, right? And that they're more committed to their script and their structure and their process than what the prospect is actually saying. Cheryl says, seems so obvious, but completely on point. It does. It almost is like weird doing this video because it seems obvious to be saying it, but you would be so you'd be so surprised how I see this implemented. Like I think the script gives them, and the structure gives them certainty, and so they cling on to their script and the order in which they're asking the questions, and they're so much more committed to that than actually listening to the prospect and feverishly taking notes, and then based on the notes going deeper with more specific questions, right? That's what Socratic dialogue is all about. And when you do that with a loose framework all in mind, you're able to lead the conversation in a very organic way to the place that you want it to be. Larissa says, had a call this morning. This is kind of the behavioral flexibility you teach makes a huge difference. Yeah, Larissa's had a lot of success as a client with this. And the best part about really mastering the dialogue is that not only does your prospect feel more heard, the trust is there. Do you go deeper? So the conversation's way more effective. But at the same time, the conversation's shorter. It'll actually tighten up your discovery process to make the conversation a lot shorter. And it feels more organic, natural, and it's a more enjoyable conversation. Because instead of just running down a script and doing the same thing time after time and just a repeated process, you're actually having a conversation with a human being. It just becomes more fun. Yeah, and Larissa says she used to cling on the script like her life depended on it. And that's the thing. Like, we want a structure, because a script is really just an effort to sort of like get prepared for the call and like define certainty, right, with what's going to happen in the call, right? It's like we want to cling on to this to give us certainty, right? But when we do that and we're more committed to the script than actually listening, and we're asking our questions based off the script instead of based off what the prospect is actually saying, then we lose connection with the prospect and we never go deep. We're always going to go wide and not deep. If you imagine a graph, I always teach this to clients, is like, if you imagine a graph and this axis is how deep you go on the call, and this axis is like the length of the call, most salespeople, they're like this, right? They just like, I don't even know if this is like a good illustration with how this Facebook Live is, but they're like kind of just staying surface level, right? And they're going wide, not deep. You want your call to go like this, right? It's like down, if that makes sense. Maybe I can do like an infographic on that sometime. But anyhow, you want to go like utilize what the prospects is saying to go deeper and deeper and deeper, opposed to trying to commit and hit all the questions on the script. Do you still see, this is Marley, I believe, do you still see an appropriate time for recaps though? Absolutely. I would say more near the transition phase of the call, to where you're transitioning out of discovery and into, I call it the transition phase. So into the transition, or you're transitioning so you can recap then. Another way as well is that, like, if you've been talking about a certain topic and now you need to transition the discovery phase of the call to kind of like a different topic, you can insert a little bit of a summary there, right? So you might ask questions and go like 4 or 5 levels deep on, let's say, like the pain, and like that has to do with finances and like the lack of lead flow, and like also why now, what's going to happen if nothing changes, because there's a lot of financial pain going. And hit the bottom of that to where you got everything you needed, but what we really need to do is talk about goals. So you might recap that really briefly and then pivot the conversation to goals. that's a great way to do like an intro recap in the discovery. Another great place to use it, as I was saying, is when you're transitioning into your pitch. But the recaps, like what they do and what people don't realize is it like when you recap, you almost force the conversation to get back surface level. Okay? So it's like almost like the prospects, they hear your recap and they're like, yeah, that's right, right? So they kind of think that you understand them. And it's almost like a very like nonverbal agreement that we need to move on in the conversation. So I like to avoid it unless you're pivoting into different parts of the discovery or you're transitioning into your pitch. Samantha says, I definitely used to be this way, committed to the script instead of going deep based on what they just said. Now I'm just using the script as a guideline, but not following the questions. Absolutely. I think, and I didn't make this up. I think I got it from one of my mentors. I can't figure out, or I can't remember who it was, but I think having scripted questions is really important. But you're just not going to follow like a script and a specific syntax. Instead, you need to know those questions by heart and really memorize and drill those questions. And then your questions are like arrows in your quiver that you can use to get certain outcomes, right? Because there's only a few amount of things that we really need to get from the prospect. One, they have a problem. They can't fix it on their own. They have to fix it now. There's a compelling future to fix it. Those are 4 things I teach my clients, a scale of 7 outcomes that we need to elicit on the call. So our questions are questions we ask to get the prospect to tell us, more importantly themselves, those outcomes, those things we want them to say. Right? And the biggest thing is that they're not just telling us, they're telling themselves, right? Because if you've read Robert Cialdini Influence, the first chapter is about consistency bias. When they express that to themselves, they're reminding themselves of all the things of why they have to change now, what the problem is. And when they get to the end of the call, they're going to want to stay consistent with that, okay? And moreover, at the same time, when they tell us their problems and why they have to change now and all these different things, they have to relive all the emotions, associated with those problems themselves, if that makes sense. So let me know if you guys have any other questions. I kind of went on a rant here, but what we were really talking about is using Socratic dialogue, okay, and asking skill questions that demonstrate that you were listening, one, and allow the conversation to go deeper, and being more committed to that, which is all based on what the prospect is telling you, opposed to committed to your script. Okay, it's the biggest mistake I see is that prospect or salespeople not listening and asking their next question based off the script opposed to what the prospect just actually said. So let me know if that makes sense, guys. I don't see any more questions here. So I'm going to sign off and drop any questions you have in the chat and we can discuss. Talk soon.